Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positron.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk to you about Season 2, Episode 4 of Star Trek Picard. It was called Watcher. As it opens, we see that Picard is trying to reach the crew, and no one is answering. And it would seem the reason for this is that there aren't any relays, so the communicators don't work at particularly long range. Right at the beginning, we also see Raffi and Seven looking for Rios at the clinic, and they speak with, I guess, the custodian who's there because no one else is there. There's some dialogue exchanged about what happened when ICE raided the facility, and there was some really heavy-handed talk about ICE and, immigration crackdowns and so forth, that was critical of all of it. We'll talk more about that later. As the La Sirena is undergoing auto repairs, which must be a thing in the 25th century, Picard engages a cloak that it would seem is common on Confederation ships and heads into the villa with Agnes, where he lights a fire. You see that he has some flashbacks to his childhood as he's explaining the history of the villa to Agnes. Then, as they're trying to figure out what to do next in order to find the Watcher and figure out when everything started, she actually calls Picard Dixon Hill, which is interesting because, of course, that's the character he played on the holodeck when he would go in there for recreation. It turns out that Agnes is sort of subliminally aware of the number 15 because somehow she got from the Queen that the date of the divergence is the 15th, which is 3 days away from the date that they're in, presently. And I thought it was a little lame. It was written very clunkily, like he says that she was playing with an abacus in the room and she moved 15 of the tiles, and then she did something else related to 15, and then she picked a bottle of wine that was around for them to drink, which is from 1915. And so Picard sussed out that 15 meant something. And then she's like, well, what, 15 years, 15 months, 15 hours? And they landed on 15 days just sort of at random, which, they're guessing that's what it was. It's very lame. Meanwhile, back to Raffi and Seven, they're on a bus, a city bus. And as they're riding this city bus, you can hear a particular song in the background, or rather, an updated version of a particular song that was heard when Kirk and Spock were on a bus in San Francisco in Star Trek IV, as it was being played by a kind of punky guy who, it turns out, is once again on the bus listening to this music, to which Seven says,
"You mind stopping that noise?"
which was exactly Kirk's line in Star Trek IV. And of course, in Star Trek IV, the punk, gives him the finger and just keeps playing the song and actually turns it up. And then Spock, neck pinches him. But in this, he just says, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, I just really like that song. And he turns it off. So it was kind of funny, a nice little cameo Easter egg kind of thing. Back on the ship, Picard beams to the location of the Watcher. I guess they couldn't do this at first because the ship was being, undergoing repairs. And so they went into the villa. And now that the ship repaired itself, he uses the transporter to go to the location of the Watcher, or what was supposed to be the location of the Watcher. Once he's gone, the Queen taunts Agnes about being overlooked on the team and having felt the euphoria of assimilation, even though she was trying to deny it to herself. And there are folks who suspect that Agnes is the Borg Queen in the future that we saw in the first episode. Others think it's Picard's mother. I don't think it's either of those. I think that the Borg Queen in the future that we saw in the first episode is the same Borg Queen we're dealing with now. And that's why she says, she calls Picard by name. Not only that, she would know him as Locutus. She would know who Picard is. And I think that's also why she says, look up, because again, she knows his mind. And I think the twist, so that's all normal. But I think the twist part of it is that it's going to be this same Queen that ends up helping them in this situation. I think that's what makes the most sense. We'll see if I'm right in about 6 episodes. Back to Picard, who is at the location of the Watcher, which of course is 10 forward. He encounters a young Guinan there. And I found it interesting because, of course, they cast a different actress for the part, who, by the way, to me looks nothing like Whoopi Goldberg, so that they could have a young Guinan as opposed to using Whoopi Goldberg and having her look the way she looked in the 25th century and not the way she looked previously, which wouldn't make any sense, and without having to de-age her. So I don't know. She looked too different to me. Worse than that, she behaves very uncharacteristically for Guinan on multiple fronts. Guinan was always very calm and approachable, and even when Q shows up and she's got her guard up, she doesn't really get what I would call standoffish, or harshly anyway. And in this, she's just harsh and seems jaded and angry, and it wasn't Guinan to me. So I've never seen Guinan that way in Star Trek, and didn't come off as Guinan to me. And of course, not being Whoopi Goldberg, it was, I don't know why they did that. Especially because, well, we'll talk about especially why later. But she seems not to know Picard, which of course makes sense. She wouldn't know him exactly, because even when she sensed differences in time, she didn't know exactly what was wrong. So that she doesn't know him doesn't surprise me. And he gets on her bad side pretty quickly because, again, she's this different version of Guinan that's ornery for some reason. Anyway, when the girls go looking for Rios some more at a police station, which I guess is where they were going on the bus, there's yet some more heavy anti-ICE sentiment coming from them and coming from a bystander that they talk to. And Star Trek has always been political. Star Trek has always had something to say that was a commentary on the times. So it doesn't bother me that they're doing it here, and they did it in the last couple episodes. But I don't know. They don't seem to have. They're not doing it with very much finesse, I don't think. It was very much finessed when they did it on the other shows and woven in a way that didn't feel like, heavy-handed or sloppy. And that's how this felt. So it rubbed me the wrong way. It just was, it wasn't very skillful the way they put in the commentary about ICE. It was very heavy-handed. So anyway, they learn that he's not at the LAPD, that he's with ICE in like a detention facility, probably, but they don't know where. Back to Picard and Guinan, it becomes clear that the reason she's kind of not having it, as it were, is because humanity is, behaving so badly, reckless, selfish, and again, it seems a bit overwrought. I don't know what the word is. It's just so direct. It was very direct. And, people tell me they don't like new Star Trek because the political commentary isn't subtle. And I like to tell them it wasn't subtle in the original series or in Next Gen or anywhere. It was never subtle. But there's a way to do things overtly that at the same time isn't completely unnuanced and completely blatant, so I don't know. It's hard to explain. But I didn't like it because it cheapens Star Trek to me when they don't do it right. But she's having this conversation with Picard. She's talking about leaving Earth because of all this. He reminds her of things that she says to him in the future, and it triggers a symptom in her of the thing that affects El-Orians when time has changed and they start to recognize it. So I didn't know how I felt about that, because when it happened before in yesterday's Enterprise, she didn't need to be triggered. it just sort of, she knew immediately. So I don't know, maybe it's because she was older. I don't know. It just seemed weird. Anyway, Rafi and Seven then break into and steal a police car without the keys, without tripping the car alarm, without being seen on the camera, without drawing any attention to themselves until they crash the security gate to get out. And on top of this, between the two of them, they knew how to use a 400-year-old computer, the one on board in the cop car, for which they didn't need a password, and they immediately knew how to operate a 400-year-old car. And, you know, knowing how to drive the car, you could maybe attribute to, you know, because it's Seven that drives, could maybe attribute it to her having been part of the collective and having a whole lot of knowledge in her head, although we don't know how much of that is present in this timeline because she's in the body of a Seven that was never assimilated. You could attribute it to she's spent a lot of time on holodecks doing things from the past, but they never explain it. And that's this lazy and sloppy. She just knows how to drive a car. And driving's not all that difficult, you know, foot on gas, turn the wheel, foot on brake, stop the car. But she knows how to start it without the keys, apparently, without having to, what do you call it? Without having to do something similar to what they used to do in the old days when they would, you know, rip the steering column open and fiddle with the ignition wires and jack them together to start a car. I forget what you call that. And you can't really do it anymore, but she doesn't do anything like that at all. Doesn't, you know, whip out the equivalent of a sonic screwdriver type thing to get it to go. Nothing. Just, do you know how to drive this thing? Of course I know how to drive this thing. And she goes. And it's like, how did you start the car? Anyway, they head off in the car and they're trying to get to the facility that Rios is at, which they found on the computer. And they are simultaneously in contact with Agnes, who's trying to get the transporter up because it went down after Picard left the ship, so that she can beam them where they need to go because they're being chased. Meanwhile, Picard and Guinan talk a little bit more about the need for her to not give up on the human race and to help him figure things out. Over in the detention facility, Rios is told he's being bussed off to somewhere. And when he's asked, you know, when the guard says to him one more time, you know, if you want to provide your name and proof of citizenship, we can let you out of here. But other than that, you're going on this bus. He says, okay, here's my name. He tells him his name, Cristobal Rios. And he says, you know, I'm here from the 25th century. I'm a captain of a starship. And I'm on a mission to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and civilizations. And the guy's like, yeah, okay, pal, you're nuts. It was kind of funny, actually. So next, Agnes gets the transporter working after making a deal with the Queen to provide companionship to her in exchange for her helping. And she beams Seven and Raffi to a location from which they can intercept the bus that Rios is now on, which they learn he's on when the computer alerts them that his situation's been updated and he's being moved. Meanwhile, Picard is taken by Guinan to the Crazy Eye people that we've seen in the trailers and the previews, one of whom takes him to the Watcher, who is actually not Guinan, which is weird because the coordinates led him to Guinan, who was supposed to be the Watcher. So I don't know if that's they should have written it as a person who can help you get to the Watcher, but they didn't. Anyway, it's crazy because in this scene, she's totally afraid of these weird-eyed people. And she leaves as fast as she can to get out of there. Again, weird, because Guinan was never afraid of it. She wasn't afraid of Q. Like, you know, I don't know. Didn't make sense to me. So maybe they can explain who these eye people are, and it'll make sense that she was afraid of them. But this was a very uncharacteristic Guinan. So I don't know. And you can't even attribute it to the timeline change because it hasn't changed yet. So it was just very strange. Anyway, these crazy eye people lead him to the person who actually is the Watcher. And it turns out to be Laris, who it would seem is not Romulan. At least she doesn't have the pointed ears. And she opens up this kind of square in the middle, in midair, and teleports off with him somewhere. And also before the episode ends, we see Q in LA wearing a jacket with a Europa mission patch on it. And he's sort of narrating a kind of scenario about a person, as we see a woman sitting and reading a book, and I wasn't sure what was going on there, but then he snaps his fingers to try to affect some type of something with his magic, and nothing happens, which he is quite surprised by. And that's all there is for this episode. It's funny because I predicted previously that we were going to end up seeing a We've Got to Rescue Rios mission. And so that was, this episode. I didn't hate this episode. I didn't find anything about it that was really, really awful, except the whole thing with the police car and the computer. That was really bad. And I guess the whole mischaracterization of Guinan. But I don't know. I guess this stuff was pretty bad. So not a great episode. And, I think that it's probably not going to be the last not great episode. And I say that because this story, the Borg try to make a peaceful contact, and it doesn't go well. And so Picard blows up the Stargazer, and Q intervenes and saves a bunch of people, but not before going back into the past to change it and creating a totalitarian future for humanity, which Picard now has to go back in time and fix. To me, isn't the kind of story that you can take and spread out over 10 episodes, a 10-hour story. That's a 2 or 3 hour story. And so what they're having to do to make it go 10 episodes is stretch it out with this whole Rios gets arrested thing. So they have to spend time getting him back before they can really get together and pursue the timeline change and prevent it. They did this whole thing where, Picard doesn't get to the Watcher until the last minute of the episode because he spends his time farting around in the villa while the ship rebuilds itself and farting around with Guinan. Well, why are they doing all that? Because they need to stretch it out. They need to make 10 episodes out of this story concept. And it doesn't have 10 episodes worth of legs. So I think this was the weakest episode so far. And we're going to see a bunch more of them sprinkled throughout these 10 episodes because the story isn't a big enough concept to fill 10 episodes, but they're trying to make it fill 10 episodes. So I'm afraid we're going to see a bunch more episodes like this that weren't that good. The whole sequence of chasing the police car and all that is just it's filler. It's an action sequence to take up time. It doesn't move the ball forward in the story. It's there because they needed a 4th episode that didn't move the ball forward very much. And so that's what they did. These episodes are wheel spinning episodes, placeholder episodes, water treading episodes that fill an hour or 50 minutes or whatever it is so that it can be slotted into a season and make it 10 episodes long, but which doesn't move the story forward. Like, he doesn't meet the Watcher until the very last second, basically. And so the next episode, we're going to see him actually talk with her probably, and the ball will move forward a little bit there, and some of the story will actually unfold there, but not in this episode. None of the story unfolded. You know what I'm saying? The story of what happened and who the Watcher is. None of that unfolded in this episode because it was spent wheel spinning, treading water. And it's unfortunate. But I'll be back with a review of episode 5 once it is released. Until then, peace and long life.